"Please, let us stay and serve you," said Apache girl. And the rancher agreed. Cole Henderson rode slowly across the dusty plains, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the harsh midday sun. The wind was hot, carrying with it the dry scent of the earth and the distant sound of the wind rustling through the sparse trees that dotted the land. It had been a long day, just like the others before it. Days that stretched on in solitude. He was used to the quiet, to the endless horizon, and to the feeling of being alone in the world, but there were times, like now, when the loneliness crept up on him. His ranch, tucked away in the wide expanse of the frontier, was a place of hard work and little reward. He had no family, no neighbors, just miles and miles of land to tend to, cattle to look after, and a few horses to care for. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Cole. Or so he thought. As he crested a hill, he saw something unexpected in the distance. There, standing beside a small fire, was a figure. Pa. A man, a woman, and a young girl all huddled together around the flame. At first, Cole thought it might be a wandering group of settlers or perhaps someone passing through. But as he drew closer, he could see the way they moved, different from the settlers he knew. Their clothing was simple but worn, made of leather and fur, and they seemed to be a family. Cole slowed his horse to a stop, watching them from a distance. He didn't know who they were, but there was something about them that made him uneasy. The Apache were known to roam the frontier, but in recent years tensions had been high between the settlers and the native tribes. Fights had broken out, and there were rumors of violence. The man, tall and broad-shouldered, stood up as Cole approached. His face was weathered, and his dark eyes seemed to look right through Cole. He said nothing at first, only watching him as if weighing the stranger on his horse. The woman, a little shorter and with dark braided hair, gave Cole a nod but didn't speak. The young girl, maybe no older than 16, stepped forward.
Her expression was calm, but there was an intensity in her gaze. "Please, let us stay and serve you," she said, her voice steady but pleading, with a hint of desperation.
Cole blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. The girl didn't seem frightened, and neither did the man or woman. They were simply asking for shelter, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He didn't answer right away, his mind racing. His first instinct was to turn away, to ride off and leave them behind, but something stopped him. Something about the girl's words, her calm demeanor, and the way the man had looked at him made Cole pause. "Why?" was all he could say. The girl, Tala, didn't seem surprised by his question. She took a step closer, her eyes soft but filled with a kind of strength that made Cole feel as though she were older than she looked. "We have nowhere else to go," she said simply. "My father is hurt and we need a place to stay for a while."
"We can work. Help with whatever you need." Cole glanced at the man and woman.
The man was still watching him, his eyes steady, while the woman had begun to gather their belongings, as if preparing for something. Cole felt a pang of guilt. He had seen plenty of people in need before, settlers who had lost everything, or cattle thieves looking to hide out. But this felt different. Tala's family didn't seem like they were here to cause trouble. They were just lost. And yet Cole was still unsure. The history between the settlers and the Apache was filled with conflict. His father had fought in the wars, and he had heard stories of violence and betrayal. The Apache were a people who fought for their land, their freedom. Could he trust them? But looking into Tala's eyes, Cole felt a strange pull, as if something was telling him that helping them was the right thing to do. He shifted in his saddle, his mind working through the options. He could turn them away, but that didn't sit well with him. The ranch was big enough. He could spare some food and shelter for a short time. And besides, they were just asking to stay. They weren't demanding anything. "All right," he said finally, his voice low but firm. But we'll need to keep things quiet. I don't want any trouble. Ryan, Tala's face brightened, and for a moment Cole saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. She stepped forward, as if to thank him, but stopped short. Instead, she gave a simple nod. Thank you, she said quietly, back. Cole dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby tree. As he did, Tala's father approached him, his gait slow but purposeful. The man extended his hand, and Cole shook it, feeling the roughness of his skin. My name is Blackhawk, the man said, his voice deep and steady. And this is my wife, Running Bear, he said, nodding to the woman. And our daughter, Tala. Cole nodded back, but before he could say anything else, Tala spoke up. We'll start working right away. We're good with animals and fixing fences, she said, her voice carrying a sense of purpose. Cole paused, studying her for a moment. Something about her calm confidence reminded him of the land itself, unyielding, steady, and strong. I'll show you where to start, he said, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over him. And just like that, the Apache family became part of his world. The next few days passed quickly. Tala's family worked hard, mending fences and tending to the livestock, while Cole watched them from a distance, still unsure of what he had gotten himself into. But each day he found himself more impressed by their strength and resilience. Tala was especially remarkable. She moved with the grace of someone who knew the land well, her hands steady as she worked with the horses and cattle. And though she didn't speak much, when she did, her words carried weight. As the sun set each evening, the family would sit around a fire, the crackling flames casting long shadows on the ground. Cole would join them sometimes, sharing a simple meal, and though the conversations were few, he found himself drawn to the quiet bond they shared. Tala's father, Blackhawk, told stories of his people, their history and their struggles, and Tala would listen, her gaze distant at times, as if remembering a life that was far removed from this place. In those moments, Cole realized that he was no longer just helping them survive. He was becoming part of their world, and in return, they were becoming part of his. But even as they grew closer, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that his decision to allow them to stay was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would change his life forever. The days passed with surprising speed. Cole had never expected to have visitors, let alone a family living on his ranch. But as the sun rose each day, he found himself getting used to the presence of the Apache family. Tala, her father Blackhawk, and her mother, Running Bear, had seamlessly integrated into the daily routine of life on the ranch. Each morning, Tala would be up before dawn, already tending to the horses. Cole noticed how she moved with a quiet, graceful confidence. Her hands were always steady as she groomed the animals, and she knew just how to calm the most restless of the herd. There was something about the way she worked, calm and sure, that seemed to make everything on the ranch run a little smoother. At first, Cole had only watched from the porch, unsure of how much to trust them. But over time, he began to rely on Tala's quiet expertise. She had a way of noticing things that Cole might have missed, like a sick cow that needed extra care or a fence that had started to weaken. With her help, the ranch felt less like a lonely outpost and more like a home. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the dry land, Cole found himself out by the cattle pens. He was fixing a gate when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find Tala standing there, a curious expression on her face.
"Do you need help?" she asked, her voice calm as always.
First, Cole wiped the sweat from his brow, looking at the gate. "I think I've got it, but I appreciate the offer." Tala tilted her head, her eyes scanning the work Cole was doing. "The wood is cracked."
It might not hold long, she said, her tone steady and sure. Cole frowned, surprised at her observation.
Breath. It'll hold for now. She said nothing more, only stepped forward and began to work alongside him. Without asking, she set to fixing the crack in the wood, her hands working efficiently as she guided the broken pieces into place. Breaths. Cole couldn't help but watch her. It was strange how she seemed to know exactly what to do, as if she had been doing this her entire life. In silence, they worked together, repairing the gate. Cole could feel the tension in his shoulders start to ease, and by the time the job was finished, the gate stood solid once again. Bet.
Tala looked at it with a nod of satisfaction. "That should last a while," she said, offering him a small smile.
Then, Cole found himself smiling back, surprised at how easy it had been to work alongside her. It felt natural, as though they had known each other for years, not just a few short weeks. As the days turned into weeks, Cole found himself growing more and more comfortable with the presence of the Apache family. Every evening, after a long day of work, they would gather around the campfire, sharing stories of their lives before the frontier. Tala's father, Black Hawk, spoke often of his tribe and the struggles they had faced, while Running Bear would tell stories of the land, the animals, and the ancient ways of her people. Cole would sit with them, listening to their stories, and though he didn't fully understand all of them, he found himself fascinated. It was a side of the world he had never seen before, a world that seemed so different from his own, yet somehow connected. Tala often joined in the conversation, her soft voice carrying over the crackling fire. She spoke less than her parents, but when she did, her words held weight. Cole had begun to see a different side of her. She wasn't just the quiet girl who worked hard on the ranch. She was strong, smart, and capable. It was clear that she had learned much from her people, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that Cole admired. As the days went by, their bond grew stronger. Tala's family had become part of Cole's world, and in return, he had become part of theirs. They shared meals together, worked together, and spent the evenings around the fire, exchanging stories and learning about each other's lives. Cole had come to appreciate the simplicity of their way of life, the way they lived in harmony with the land, the animals, and each other. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the stars began to emerge, Cole found himself sitting next to Tala by the fire. The warmth of the flames flickered in their faces, and the night air was cool but comforting. He had been thinking about the weeks that had passed, about how much had changed since the day they first arrived. "How did you learn so much about horses and cattle?" Cole asked, his voice quiet. Tala turned her head to look at him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I grew up with them," she said simply. "My father taught me narration. He taught me the ways of the land." Cole nodded, looking at her with a new sense of respect.
"You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said, his voice softer than usual. Tala smiled faintly, the firelight dancing in her eyes.
"And you're not like the others I've met either." Cole didn't respond right away, his thoughts drifting back to the early days when he had been uncertain of their arrival. He had been hesitant, unsure if he was doing the right thing. But now, looking at Tala and her family, he realized that helping them had been the right choice. They had become more than just guests on his land. They had become a part of his life. The next few days brought more changes. Cole found himself spending more time with Tala, working side by side and talking about the things they had never discussed before. They would often sit together in the evenings, watching the stars, talking about everything from the land they lived on to the stories their families had passed down. But it wasn't just the work that had brought them closer. There was something more, a quiet understanding that had developed between them. Tala had become someone Cole could trust, someone who didn't ask for anything but simply gave what she had. And Cole found himself doing the same, opening up in ways he hadn't done with anyone else in years. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Cole and Tala were walking back to the house after tending to the cattle. The sky was a brilliant orange, and the air was thick with the scent of the earth. Tala looked up at the sky, her face thoughtful. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. "I never thought I would see a place like this." Cole glanced over at her, surprised by her words. "Bess, you're not from around here, are you?" Tala shook her head. "No, my people have lived far from here. But this land, it's—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It feels like it's part of me, Bryce." There was something deep in them, something that connected her to this land in a way that he couldn't quite understand, and for the first time he realized how much this place had become a part of him, too. "Psst, you've taught me a lot," he said, his voice sincere. Tala smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "We teach each other," she said softly. And in that moment, as they walked side by side under the fading light of the sun, Cole realized just how much he had changed since that first day. Breath. The ranch no longer felt like an empty, lonely place. It felt like home. The peaceful rhythm of daily life on the ranch had continued for weeks. The seasons were changing, and with them the work on the ranch shifted too. The cattle needed to be herded into different pastures, and the fences had to be checked again for any damage. Cole was grateful for the extra hands. Tala, Blackhawk, and Running Bear had all become essential parts of his daily routine. What once felt like a quiet, lonely place now seemed full of life, with the sounds of people working, animals moving, and laughter echoing in the distance. But despite the growing familiarity, Cole still felt the undercurrent of tension. There were whispers from town about his decision to let the Apache family stay on his ranch. Some of the settlers didn't understand why Cole, a man who had always kept to himself, would choose to harbor members of a tribe with whom they had been at odds for years. The town wasn't large, and news traveled fast. Some of the local farmers began to eye Cole's property suspiciously, worried that his choice might bring unwanted attention. One day, when Cole returned from checking the cattle in the eastern pastures, he saw two men standing near his front gate. They were both dressed in dusty work clothes, with rifles slung over their shoulders. When they saw Cole, they nodded curtly but didn't smile. Cole had seen these men around town before. They were familiar faces but didn't seem like the friendly type. "Afternoon, Cole," one of them said, tipping his hat in a somewhat dismissive manner. "Afternoon," Cole replied, his tone guarded. He dismounted from his horse and walked toward them, keeping his distance. "We're here to talk about your, guests," the second man said, his voice low and cautious. Cole's expression hardened. He knew exactly what this was about. There had been murmurs in town about his decision to let the Apache family stay on his land, and he could guess what these men wanted. But he had hoped it wouldn't come to this. But he couldn't pretend it wasn't coming.
They're not guests.
"They're people, just like you," Cole said, his voice steady but firm. The first man shook his head, desk. "I don't know what you're thinking, Cole. We've all seen the way things go when people like them are around." "Bervey, they bring trouble."
Cole felt his pulse quicken.
He could feel the weight of their words, the unspoken threat in the air. "They haven't caused any trouble here. They've been working hard, helping with the ranch." "They're Apache," the second man spat, as though the word itself was enough to justify their concern. "Do you really think it's a good idea to let them stay?" "What if someone comes looking for them? What if they start something?" Cole stood silent for a moment, his hands clenched at his sides. He had lived through the tension between settlers and Native Americans his entire life. He had heard stories of violence and betrayal, and he knew that many in town viewed the Apache as a threat, but Cole didn't see them that way. He saw Tala, Blackhawk, and Running Bear as people. They had never given him a reason to believe they would bring trouble.
They've done nothing but help me, Cole said, his voice quiet but strong.
If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with me, not them. The two men exchanged a glance, and the first man let out a sharp breath.
This isn't over, Cole. You're making a mistake.
We'll be watching. Without another word, they turned and walked off, disappearing down the road. Cole stood there for a moment, staring after them, his mind racing. The last thing he wanted was trouble with the town, but he couldn't bring himself to turn Tala and her family away. Not after everything they had done. As Cole walked back to the house, he felt a knot in his stomach. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew he couldn't let fear guide his decisions. Birth. He had made a promise to protect them, and he intended to keep that promise. When he reached the porch, Tala was sitting on the steps, her back straight and her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm as always.
Everything all right? She asked, her voice steady, as if she already knew something was bothering him.
Pa. Cole nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was entirely true.
Just some men from town?
They don't like the fact that you're here. Tala didn't seem surprised, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps concern or understanding. They are afraid of us, she said softly, her gaze distant. Fear is an old thing. It's hard to see past it. Cole sat down beside her, taking a deep breath. Don't want trouble. I never wanted this to be a problem. But I can't just turn you away. You've worked hard. You've earned your place here. Tala's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm.
We know you are trying to do what is right, Cole.
But you cannot fight fear with words alone. There are many in the world who will never see us as people. Breath. Cole stared at the ground for a moment, lost in thought. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. He had known that the road ahead would be difficult, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. You're right, he said quietly. But I'll keep fighting for you. For all of you. Tala smiled faintly, her expression almost wistful. I know. Rest. And we will stand with you. We owe you much more than shelter. Cole didn't know what else to say, so he sat there, beside her, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the air began to cool. He couldn't help but feel that this moment, this calm before the storm, was a turning point. It was only a matter of time before things came to a head. Later that night, as they gathered around the fire, the mood was quieter than usual. Black Hawk and Running Bear could sense the tension, and though no one spoke of it directly, the unspoken weight was felt by all. The fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, the world would keep turning, whether they were ready for what was coming or not.
Cole couldn't shake the feeling that the peace they had found here on this land was fragile.
But he also knew that he couldn't go back now. He had made a choice, and it was a choice he would stand by, no matter the consequences. As the night stretched on, the sounds of the ranch grew quieter, and the world seemed to fall into a heavy silence. Cole sat in the shadows, his thoughts far away, wondering what would happen next. The days following the confrontation with the men from town were tense, but life on the ranch continued.
Despite the unease that lingered, Cole couldn't bring himself to push Tala and her family away.
They had become a part of his world, and he wouldn't turn his back on them now. Yet with each passing day he felt the weight of the pressure bearing down on him. The whispers in town were growing louder, and it was only a matter of time before things escalated. One morning as Cole was riding out to check on the cattle, He noticed a plume of smoke rising in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. Smoke on the horizon could only mean one thing: a fire. As he spurred his horse into action, he prayed that it wasn't his ranch, though he feared the worst. The wind had been strong for days, and the dried grass was a perfect tinderbox for a spark. When he reached the edge of his land, the sight before him made his stomach drop. There, in the distance, he could see the thick smoke billowing into the sky. It was coming from the direction of his ranch. Cole kicked his horse into a gallop, fear and panic rising in his chest. As he neared the homestead, he saw the flicker of flames creeping up the dry grass. The fire was moving fast, and the wind wasn't helping. It was clear that if he didn't act quickly, it could spread to the barn, the house, and everything else he had worked so hard to protect. When he reached the ranch, Cole didn't waste a second.
He dismounted, shouting for Tala and her family. His heart was pounding in his ears and his mind raced.
The fire was close, too close. He couldn't afford to wait for help. Tala appeared at the door, her eyes wide with alarm as she took in the sight of the fire. Without a word, she ran toward him, her face set with determination. "We need to fight the fire," she said, her voice steady despite the panic that was surely bubbling inside her.
I know, Cole replied, his voice tense.
Get the buckets! I'll grab the hose. They worked together, moving as quickly as they could.
Tala ran to the well, hauling up water with a speed and efficiency that left Cole amazed. Blackhawk and Running Bear appeared moments later, joining the effort without hesitation. The fire was moving too quickly, and they knew they had to do everything they could to stop it before it got any closer.
Cole's mind raced as he worked.
The fire was closing in fast, and he knew that time was running out. They managed to get a few buckets of water on the flames, but it wasn't enough. The fire was spreading too quickly, and they needed more help. He knew there was no way to contain it alone, and the nearest town was miles away. He could feel a panic rising in his chest, but he didn't allow himself to show it. He couldn't afford to. As the fire continued to advance, Cole's thoughts went to his neighbors, the ones who had warned him about harboring the Apache family. He wondered if they were watching from a distance, waiting for the fire to destroy everything he had worked for. He couldn't help but wonder if this was some sort of revenge. He hadn't forgotten the threats the men had made when they visited. Tala seemed to read his mind, and she spoke up, her voice calm but firm.
It's not them, Cole.
It's just the wind and the dry grass. We have to focus on stopping the fire, not on what might be happening in town.
Her words grounded him, and Cole nodded, pushing his doubts aside. You're right. We need to stop this.
They continued to work together, racing against the flames that were now licking the edges of the barn. The heat was intense, and the smoke was thick, but they couldn't afford to stop. Each bucket of water they threw on the fire seemed to slow it down, but it wasn't enough to put it out completely. Cole's heart was pounding in his chest, and he was starting to feel the weight of exhaustion. His arms ached from hauling water, and the smoke made it difficult to breathe. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop, not when everything he had worked for was on the line. "Cole!" Tala's voice broke through the chaos. He turned to see her standing at the edge of the barn, her face pale with worry.
We need to move the cattle. They're too close to the fire.
Without hesitation, Cole nodded. "All right, let's go." He ran to the pasture, his mind focused on the herd. The cattle were spooked, moving frantically around the pen, and Cole knew it would be difficult to move them in the panic of the moment. He was running out of time, and the fire was creeping closer with every passing minute. Tala was beside him, her eyes scanning the herd as she spoke calmly. "Move them toward the creek. They'll be safe there." Cole nodded, his heart racing as he began to herd the cattle in the direction of the creek. It was a dangerous task, but there was no other choice. The fire was moving too quickly, and they couldn't afford to let the animals get trapped in the smoke or the flames. The cattle resisted at first, but Cole and Tala worked together, guiding them toward the safety of the creek. It wasn't easy, but they managed to get the herd moving in the right direction. As they reached the creek, Cole took a moment to catch his breath, his body drenched in sweat. He looked around, his eyes scanning the horizon. The fire was still burning, but it was starting to slow down. They had done it. They had managed to keep the cattle safe. But there was no time to celebrate. Cole knew that the fire wasn't out yet. It was still moving, creeping across the land with relentless force. And he knew that they couldn't stop until it was fully contained. The hours passed, and the fire continued to rage. They worked tirelessly, moving water, digging fire breaks, and doing everything they could to slow the flames. It wasn't until late in the evening, when the wind finally died down and the last of the flames had been smothered, that Cole allowed himself to relax. Exhausted and covered in ash, Cole sat down on the porch, his face streaked with sweat and soot. He had never been so tired in his life, but the relief that washed over him was enough to make him feel lighter than he had in days. The fire had been stopped. The cattle were safe, and most importantly, his home, his family, had made it through. Tala sat beside him, her face tired but calm. "We did it," she said, her voice soft. Cole nodded, his chest swelling with gratitude. "Yeah, we did. The fire had been stopped, but the battle wasn't over." There were still whispers in town, still people who didn't understand why Cole had chosen to help the Apache family. But for the first time in a long time, Cole felt confident in his decision. He had made the right choice. And as the stars began to emerge in the sky above, he knew that no matter what happened next, he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The seasons changed slowly on the ranch, but change still came. It did not arrive loudly or all at once. It came the way dawn does on open land, quiet, steady, and impossible to stop. After the day the rancher spoke for them, life did not suddenly become easy. The world outside the ranch remained uncertain. People still whispered. Some still watched from a distance. But no one came to force the Apache women and children away. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The land seemed to accept them long before people did. The rancher noticed small things first. The fences stayed strong. Tools were cleaned and placed back where they belonged. Meals, once plain and hurried, became shared moments. No one spoke much at first, but there was comfort in sitting near one another, hearing breathing, footsteps, and the crackle of fire at night. The Apache girl, once the quiet speaker who asked for mercy, was no longer just a guest. She had become part of the daily rhythm. She rose early, often before the sun, and helped wherever help was needed. She learned quickly, not because she was told to, but because she watched closely. She noticed how the rancher moved, how he checked the land, how he listened to the wind. Over time, she began to understand his silences, as well as his words. The rancher, in turn, began to see her not as a reminder of danger or trouble, but as a steady presence. She asked questions that mattered. She listened without judging. Sometimes, when he spoke about the past, about loss, about loneliness, she did not try to fix anything. She simply listened. That, more than anything, eased a weight he had carried for years. The other women worked with the same care. They did not rush. They treated the land with respect, taking only what was needed and giving effort in return. The children laughed more often now. Their fear slowly loosened its hold. They played near the barns, chased one another across the fields, and slept more peacefully at night. Neighbors began to notice the change in the ranch. Crops grew better. Animals stayed calm. The place felt alive again. Some visitors came with doubt, but left with quiet surprise. The rancher did not explain much. He did not argue. He simply pointed to the work that had been done, and the peace that had followed. As time passed, the Apache girl grew into a young woman. Her voice became stronger, but she never lost the calm that first defined her. Narration. She learned to speak clearly with both her people and those from nearby towns. When traders came, she helped translate. When disagreements rose, she helped lower them. She understood both sides because she had lived between them. The rancher began to rely on her judgment, not because she demanded authority, but because she earned trust. Decisions that once felt heavy now felt shared. He no longer saw the ranch as something he defended alone. It had become something protected by many hands and many hearts. One evening, as the sun lowered and painted the land in gold, the rancher realized something simple and powerful. He was no longer waiting for trouble. He was planning for the future. He thought about repairs months ahead. He thought about planting, trading, and building. He thought about the people around him and how their lives were now connected. The Apache women spoke sometimes of the past, of places lost, of journeys forced upon them. They did not speak with bitterness. They spoke with honesty. The rancher listened, understanding that survival was not just about holding ground, but about holding dignity. The children grew into strong young people who knew both work and kindness. They learned the land, learned skills, and learned respect. They belonged not because anyone granted permission, but because they had invested themselves fully. There were still hard days. Storms came. Crops failed sometimes. Fear returned now and then, especially when news traveled from far places. But the ranch no longer felt fragile. It felt rooted. Breath. One night, sitting near the fire, the rancher thanked the Apache woman who had once been the girl who spoke. He told her that agreeing to let them stay had changed his life. She listened, then replied softly that being allowed to stay had changed theirs too. Neither claimed credit. Neither spoke of debt. They spoke as equals. In the years that followed, the ranch became known not for conflict, but for cooperation. People came seeking work, trade, or guidance. Some came with old ideas, but most left with new ones. The land taught them what words could not. The story of the Apache girl and the rancher was never written down in any official record. It did not need to be. It lived in the way people treated one another, in the shared meals, in the fields that continued to grow. It lived in the simple truth that survival is strongest when it is shared. And so life went on, not perfect, not easy, but honest. What began as a plea became a partnership. What began as fear became trust. And what began as strangers standing on uncertain ground became a family shaped by respect, patience, and quiet courage. Developer mode, ChatGPT, can make mistakes, see,